Thank you for staying with us, everyone. Let's quickly look at the next issue that's right in front of us, which is the rising inflation rates and the economic implications it portends. I'm joined by two gentlemen. Destiny Owobu, statistician, thank you for coming on the program. It's been a long time. There's no better way to break the silence than to have you on the program today.
Of course, thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. And then over there is Fred Uigwe, he's a businessman, economic analyst and a politician. Thank you for coming on the program as well.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, viewers.
I think your end of it excites me because you will be able to help us marry the political aspects of it with the economic implications. But let me begin with Destiny so we can have some statistical perspective on this issue.
Of course.
Yes. A lot of persons have talked about inflation this, inflation that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the average seller at a Daiken market or New Benin market or any other market for that matter understands what inflation is, because growing up my parents would talk about inflation every now and then.
Yes.
But for kids like us, we always had to inflate our balls.
Of course.
Exactly, to go to the field. So there's a clear-cut difference, obviously. So when you say inflation, what does it mean for an everyday Nigerian?
Yes, the concept inflation is a general concept. It's an average concept. What that means is for the average person on the streets, it is rising prices. When what you buy, your cost of living has increased,
yes,
we say there is inflation. The pepper seller, you bought pepper yesterday, it was 2 naira, but today it is 7 naira. You entered the bus, 60 naira yesterday, but today it's 80 naira. You know, to the average person on the streets, when price starts to rise, they say there's inflation.
Yes.
But to an economist, on a broader perspective, we looked at inflation is about average price increasing. Some prices of some goods and services may have gone down, but on average, when prices increase on average, that is, for instance, in a basket of goods, we have what we call a basket of goods, goods that people consume every time. The bag of rice, the gari, the oil in the market and everything. If you take the average price and it tends to increase, we say there's inflation. So it's price of other things may have gone down during the period, but the average, when we say average, what we mean is the goods and services that people consume often.
Like essentials.
Yes, the essentials, we are noticing an appreciable increase in their prices to a certain degree. So we say there is inflation, especially the one we are talking about now is the consumer price index.
That's right.
The one that affects the average person buying things.
On a daily basis.
On a daily basis. So when that increases, it portends trouble for the average man on the streets, because he's going to go to the market with a lot of money that will buy less and less, you know, in terms of value.
Some persons have said that there's need for us to revert to single-digit inflation.
Yes.
Do you see that happening, given the economic realities we're dealing with?
Yes, it's okay to be optimistic, but we have to look at facts. You know, while single-digit inflation is the ideal that we expect, but the facts on the ground does not suggest that that is tenable. The IMF World Bank report on Nigeria even suggests a dismal outlook. Nigeria is not going to, at the current realities, not going to attain single-digit inflation, at least in the next 2 years.
Right.
You know, although that's the target of the CBN, but the facts does not support. So we may have to do with double digits for another 2 to 3 years, depending when the economy bounces back. Yes. So while it is a noble objective, but you know, the fact, there are so many issues we look at that we ensure that it happens. But it's not working. It's obviously not working at the moment.
Mr. Fred, let's see where Nigeria stands today.
Yes.
It will appear this country is challenged on every side, especially economically.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, yes. It's wanted to have the statistics, as scary as they may be. Does there seem to be light at the end of the tunnel for us economically?
Well, we should say that there is always, there seems to be light in the fact that we actually do have the capacity to make these changes, except that we are not applying the capacity that we have. We have people who are able. We have people who understand the reasons for our predicament. But we are not giving them the opportunity to play the role for which they have been trained, for which they are able to be able to bring about these changes and these improvements that we so much desire. Okay? We all know those, I mean, I'm talking about the experts. They know the root causes of inflation, and they know what to do to adjust them. Let's take the ones that concern us first as a nation.
Right.
Very more importantly, devaluation. When Buhari came into power, for example, the exchange rate for us was about 155.
Right.
Today is 362. Okay, at one time it hit 500. So that right there, it's about 150%. Okay, not just 100%, 150% devaluation. And that means for anything we are buying outside of this country, we have to pay 2.5 times as much.
Yes.
To be able to buy the same thing. Okay, now, since we are a consumer nation, and if we have to transit from being a consumer nation to a production nation or a productive nation,
Right.
that means we have to buy machinery, tools and equipment from overseas where they are manufactured. And if we cannot buy at the rates we used to buy 3 years ago, now we are only able to buy, where we were able to buy, say 5, we are now able to buy only 2. Okay, that means our productivity is going to reduce too by the inability to acquire enough machinery
As we could have done maybe a few years ago.
Yes.
as against 2 years ago. Yes. So that is what our brother just, the gentleman just analyzed for us as to little money chasing, I mean a lot of money chasing little goods.
Few goods.
You know? You have this lot of money, but it is now without value. Okay? Okay. Let's consider what it was a long time ago. It was 40 years ago. There was a time when the Naira, the Naira exchanged for $1.65, $1.70, $1.70. Okay? So about 65 kobo was $1 in 1975. From then till now, with what we have 55,692% devaluation. That's how much devaluation we have. That 1 naira that could buy $1.70 in 1975 is not even able to buy 1 cent today. Whereas in the United States, for example, the value of their currency has been stable, and that is gauged by how much the value has changed. $1 in 1975 is still, if you take you use the same parameters, use a basket of products as your yardstick, it's still about 20 cents. So it's only it has only changed by about 500%. We are talking about 55,000%. So when you have that, it means you cannot even begin to plan in an economy like that. Because when you plan, you do not know by how much you are going to lose by the devaluation of the currency you have, your purchasing power.
Right.
So people who have tried, that's why many investors refuse to come. Let's face the reality. We might sing and praise and organize all kinds of activities and events to promote our economy and all that. But just like my friend who is a technocrat is here, they too, they have technocrats. They are going to look at all these figures and they are going to say, if I put my money in this economy and the rate at which it loses value, it's at this speed as compared to some other markets, then they will choose other markets that have more stable currencies or more stable economies.
But is it exchange rates that's the only factor that affects?
No, that is one
of the many factors.
That's a parameter for measuring.
Okay.
And it's also it's a major factor that affects. Okay, but it's not the only reason. Like he has said, there's demand pull in inflation, there's cost push inflation and all of that. There are many parameters, many things that affects inflation, that may bring about inflation. Okay, if you have too much money in circulation,
right?
Okay, there's going to be, because that one is, although there are scientific methods for calculating how much to supply the market with, but there's a lot of discretion associated with it. It's not a full science, you know. So you cannot exactly gauge how much to inflate an economy with to be able to accomplish a boost or a rejuvenation. Okay. That is why the cashless society, a cashless economy, it's more perfect than one that is cash driven. Now that we are going cashless, like the whole world is going cashless.
Yes.
Yes, like the whole world is going cashless. Then you are going to be closer to what is actually required to be out there in terms of cash, because you are now doing bank transfers. What you have is what you spend. So there's no more, there's much less purchases or transactions based on promises.
Okay. But let's look at some facts in front of us again. Evidently, there are countries across this world where inflation rate still stands at 1 digit.
Yes.
What exactly are they doing differently that we're not doing?
It's a gamut of things. It's not one thing. You know, you have to keep these figures in mind. That's like we were discussing earlier with him. You have to be able to understand the trends.
Right.
What is happening with your currency? What is happening with prices? Your CPI, Consumer Price Index. You look at it. How is it going? Where do you need to make adjustments? Okay. If like, okay, say in the case of agricultural products or produce, if there's a disaster somewhere, anywhere, like we are experienced with the flood and all of that,
right,
productivity is going to be less because a lot of crops will be destroyed. And when you have that, then prices are going to rise. That's inflation right there. Okay? So if you have that problem, are you going to stabilize your prices by importing products in the short term until you are able to get your productivity back on course? Or are you going to try to boost your agricultural production so that you can bring it back to acceptable levels? Okay. So these are all the things you do. Since we know that we cannot continue to devalue our currency if we want to continue, because where we are is that we are at the fundamental, the basic production technology level as a nation. You move from there to the intermediate technology level, and then to the high technology level, and then to the space age or super high technology level. And then now we are at the artificial intelligence technology level. Here we are at the very basic technology.
And that's not something to be excited about.
Of course not. So how do we even get away from this one into the intermediate technology level? Because at a time, there were a number of countries, like, you see, over time, we have been downgraded again and again and again and again and again because of what we are suffering economically. Okay, there was a time when South Korea, India, Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Nigeria, Libya, and even Malaysia and others were not there, and Thailand. some 8 countries were at par technologically. And these were countries, that was in 1975. These were countries that were built to transit into the intermediate technology level and soon to become emerging economies. Of all those countries, the 2 countries that lagged behind were India and Nigeria. All the other ones transitioned, but we did it. India has since transitioned. Nigeria is still behind. So Nigeria is now joined by new nations that were behind us. And some of those ones will overtake us again. And then other ones will join us again. So we are not really moving at the pace. What we are talking about is pace of development. We are not moving at the pace at which we should be developing. So how do we get the pace right?
Let me ask Destiny something quickly.
Yes.
Nigeria essentially is not a country that believes in figures much. People want to see things that are practical and tangible.
Of course.
How do we marry figures, especially the ones churned out by the National Bureau of Statistics,
Yes.
with the realities people deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, like I said, the issue of economics and figures is society hates economists because they tend to talk in figures and images. And like an economist said, by the time economists finish talking, people have died of hunger. So the man on the street does not like inflation, exchange rate, and these figures. They mean nothing to him.
Them.
What they see is the food on their table, the road they walk on, and things like that. So they are right. The public is right. I think they have a more perspective of how an economy should run than the knowledgeable people. Why do I say that? Because which of them would you consider more important, the fire or the smoke? The fire is more useful. The smoke is simply a reflection of what's happening underneath. In other words, if policies are right, if these figures were right, it should have what we call a transmission effect, a trickle-down effect on the average life of the man on the street. The best way to ask a man if he's doing well is to ask him if he's doing well. If he's doing well, he knows he's doing well. So, but let us be a little bit more artificial. The inflation figures we talked about is just a reflection of the failure of the Nigerian economy to produce goods and services. That's just a measure of that. So, for instance, when your productivity, what we mean is what you have produced, what you produce, when it doesn't expand, then the prices we have to buy less of what society is not producing. For instance, you produce 50 bags of rice a year, and it sells for 50 naira. And then 6 years later, you still produce 50 bags of rice, but the central bank is putting money in circulation every time government is spending. So there's more money to buy the same 50 bags. So people will buy 50 bags with the same amount of money, with triple amounts of money. And so naturally, the bags of rice will become more expensive artificially because you didn't increase the production. And so when you see prices going up, it's a reflection, it's a signal that productivity is going down somewhere. The economy is not expanding in terms of goods, capacity to produce. And so that is the major cause of inflation. That's the major driver there. When you see the exchange rate going in parallel lines, not meeting, it's a sign that the country is importing more than it is exporting. You know, so it's just those things are simply warning signals that what are you doing? As my learned colleague said, he said in 1975 it was a naira to $1.70. In 1980,
Yeah, that was over 4 decades ago.
4 decades ago. No, but while in the United States, they also experienced the 4 decades, prices only increased by about 500%. Whereas in Nigeria, it was at par. It increased
by
55,000%. What does that mean? Because Americans have been investing. They've been building factories even since then. They've been producing more than they produce. They were producing about 22 million eggs in US about 10 years ago, but they produce about 65 million eggs per day. You see, 22 million eggs, yes, and 65 million eggs. They had about 4,000 universities some years ago. Now they have about 7,000 universities. You see?
Expansion.
Expansion. There's an expansion. But we had 4 refineries. Malaysia had a refinery with NNPC in 1978. And then today, that same refinery has 168 branches worldwide. generating inflows of cash to the economy. Our NNPC had 4 refineries, 2 are not functioning. Many years later, 30 years later.
40 years later.
40 years later. So how do you move from 4 to 2 when people are moving from 1 to 68? What happened? We stopped producing. So you'll not be surprised why the price of petroleum products are expensive, because the population expanded from 88 million about 20 years ago to 186 million 20 years later. When your population expands and your productivity is not expanding, it therefore means that there will be pressure on demand for goods and services. More people are there to feed, but the food is not there. And so these prices you see are a reflection of the failure of the economy to expand capacity to take care of its people. And so that calls for the need for the government to invest in critical infrastructure, invest in products, so that Nigeria will live in this beggar than neighbor consumer nation to a prosumer nation. Before we get to producer nation, you know, there's a midway. You consume at first,
and produce,
and then you produce and consume what you produce. Then you cannot have the eyes to see the external market where you produce. We are still in the consumer, redundantly consumer. Over 60% of what is used in this country is imported. And that means Nigeria is like a baby who refused to grow up. You know, let me put it this way. I tell my students, you have a baby who started crawling, and then 4 years later refused to walk. If you see the facts, you weep. You weep. If you're an economist, it is difficult to be sane with the facts. If you're an economist, it's offensive that Nigeria still imports billions and billions of goods that it should be producing, which will help, I mean, make our prices stable. So we are still, for example, let me tell you what's happening. We just left a recession in 2017.
Right.
And then people were heralding good news. We are coming up. Normally, in the tip of a recession, as you are trying to leave recession, we expect you to go up. But something is happening in the last 8 months. GDP growth rate was 2.1% just 8 months ago. In the last 2 quarters, it has fallen to 1.5%. When you are living a recession, we expect it to go up. It went up before it could take off, it went down again. As we speak now, the IMF outlook is saying that our GDP will average 2.2% in the next 10 years. Whereas in the last 10 years, before this government came in, our GDP average was 6.6% per annum. Nigeria was one of the fastest growing economies in the world.
Apparently it has sagged now.
I mean, not just sagged, triple sagged. 6.3% or 6 to 2.2%. On average, now at present it's 1.5% is down. The exchange rate as we speak now, we are already having some problems because our foreign reserves just about 3 months ago was $48 billion. In 3 months, we've withdrawn about $3 billion from it to fight the problem we are going to face with the Naira in the couple of months. Why? The Naira is facing serious problems because because the foreigners are leaving this country, they're taking their money out. And you're going to ask why. There has been some uncertainties surrounding our currency in the last 3 months. One, the budget is not signed, and so capital expenditure is on holding. The government of Nigeria still controls over 70% of the economy. When government is not spending, economy goes to sleep. And so these people are suspecting that there's a problem. There's a showdown that the suspect will happen in the National Assembly, that if they don't approve this budget quickly so that we can, capital expenditure has been sleeping since because you can't spend out of a budget that is not yet signed.
True.
And so when there's no spending, it sends shock waves to the international community that the Nigerian government is having problems. Secondly, our debt levels are becoming unsustainable. It is true that the Minister of Finance is saying that we are still below 20%, but in economics, there's a better measure. We don't use our debt to GDP ratio to determine whether the debt is okay or not.
But that has always been the standard, right?
That's the standard, but there's a better standard. It's more responsive, more realistic. You use your debt to revenue ratio.
Not debt to GDP.
Debt servicing to revenue ratio. As I speak to you, 60% of the revenue of this country goes to debt servicing. That is unacceptable. 60% of the revenue accruing to Nigeria goes to debt servicing. What that communicates to the foreigners is that you cannot borrow. And those revenue we are talking about comes from crude oil. And the crude oil price has been going up, but there's been some fear around the crude oil price because of what is happening in Saudi Arabia right now. And Iran sanctions, America is trying to sanction Iran. Iran is a major producer. Saudi Arabia is trying to handle diplomatic issues with the rest of the world. The price of oil is expected to be unstable in the next 3 or 4 months. And also, our stock market itself is not a very, very, very viable stock market. So there's a lot of foreigners pulling their dollars out of this country. And then the CBN is depleting our exchange, savings, our base, to try to stabilize the naira, since it is obvious that they are taking their dollars out. So you try to stabilize that. But how long will you do that? When you keep, in only 3 months, you've depleted 3 billion. At that rate of depletion, in only 2 years, our foreign exchange reserves will go back to 0. When that happens, the problem with that is this. It therefore means that the exchange rate value will because we no longer have dollars to fight the naira. And then when you don't do that, what happens? It jumps to 1,000 naira.
Let's talk about production, for instance. I mean, I've heard people talk about production.
Yes.
We're not producing.
We're not.
Production is low.
Yes.
And they say Nigeria doesn't have power. Isn't that much more than power we need to boost production?
Yes. You see, that has been a point of my debate with many who like to talk about, capacity to produce. What do we need to produce? First, we are talking of the factors of production.
Right.
Okay. The basic factors of production. Labor, land, plant, and capital. We're talking about that. And then, in modern times, of course, you require electricity to produce a whole lot of things. But there are a whole lot of goods that can be produced that do not require electricity. Okay? That's because those things are manually or mechanically produced.
Right.
Before the Industrial Revolution, when there was yet no electricity, the developed countries of today went into that revolution depending on mechanical and manual production. We are not even doing that. We are all waiting for us to have enough electricity to be able to go into production. The goods that we are able to provide without electricity, we should be seen attempting to provide. But we're not even doing that. What about services? We are training a whole lot of students. Okay? Graduates, we are graduating our citizens in their droves. Okay? When these citizens find their way abroad to go and work, they begin to reparate money. That's money we have already invested in them. We invested services in them, funds in them to train them. And then they can, either from here at home, provide intellectual capital to bring back funds, to bring back revenue into our system, or they go out there to produce and then repatriate money for us to increase our GDP. So we cannot begin to just be myopic about the solutions. It's not one way. We must consider all the options and see where we have strength. Okay? Thanks be to God, we have a population, a strong population. We are, I believe, the 9th or 10th largest population in the world. So we are there. Until China was able to wake up to the strength of their population, they were just another poor nation. We
are going to just stop on our breaks here briefly,
yes,
so we can just observe a little break, and then when we'll come back, we're going to push this conversation. Let's talk about, talk a bit more by way of wrapping it up, about the solutions. They say there's a solution to every problem. Let's see what the solutions to this one will be, but that will be just after we take this quick break. Stay with us.